As the title suggests, this video will be dedicated to Sonic's longtime enemy and greatest foe of all time, Dr. Eggman. Even if you have a little knowledge on Sonic and the Sonic franchise, you should probably be aware of the fact that Eggman obviously lacks the physical capabilities to be a relevant threat in the series. Whenever Eggman himself actually fights, it's usually when he's piloting some sort of machine or mech. It'll probably be decked out with crazy weapons, and in some cases powered up by some formidable energy sources like the Chaos Emerald. These machines tend to differ in strength mainly due to the varying amounts of preparation time put into making them. For this video, I'll cover a handful of the machines I think are the most notable when it comes to their strength, abilities, and overall usefulness in no particular order. Before I get into Eggman's different mechs, I do want to quickly address a notorious meme argument about Eggman being faster than Sonic that's been floating around for the longest time. This notion comes from the fact that in Sonic 2, right before the final boss of the game, Eggman is always able to outrun Sonic even if he runs at top speed. I should mention that this also occurs in other older Sonic titles too, but regardless, this can be addressed with two easy points. The first point being the fact that you can just dismiss this as a result of the game mechanics forcing this to happen. From what we've seen, or what I've seen, is the most commonly accepted counter argument. The other point you can make is that Sonic is just holding back and not catching Eggman on purpose. It is in character for Sonic to hold back, and this would maintain the consistency of the narrative regarding Sonic being the fastest living thing alive, which has been consistently established ever since the very first Sonic game. Either way you take it, it shows that this one feat does not prove Eggman actually scales to Sonic in travel speed, or at least his full travel speed depending on which point you go with. Now, to actually get into Eggman's creations, I'll start with a pair of fairly underrated mechs, which are the Egg Salamander and Egg Wizard, which are the final bosses for Sonic Rush and Sonic Rush Adventure respectively. Now, it should be noted that Eggman did have a collaborator in making these robots, that being his parallel universe counterpart / descendant from the far future Eggman Nega. With Egg Salamander, they intended to have it absorb all the energies of the Chaos Emeralds and Soul Emeralds, and use this double power to create the dream Eggman land that transcends dimensions. Going off of this, you can easily make the argument the Eggmen were going to create a 5D realm, since by this point in the series, Eggman is already aware of forced dimensional spacetimes and generic spacetime warping abilities of the Chaos Emerald. Not only that, but Eggman is also aware of the imaginary world from Sonic Shuffle, which houses and contains a fourth dimensional space, so of course transcending the fourth dimension would make this hypothetical Egg Salamander 5D. But even though it only absorbed energy from the Soul Emeralds, you can still scale it to this 5D argument. 5D power cut in half would be 5D regardless, just to half the extent. You could also point out that the Chaos Emeralds and Soul Emeralds are portrayed to give relative amps, since Supersonic and Burning Blaze are shown relative in their fights together. Ultimately, I think this tells us that the combination of the two powers wouldn't be exponentially superior to their individual usage. This would wind up upscaling any enemy that's on the level of or superior to Supersonic to this tier as well, which of course includes later Eggman inventions I'll be talking about later on. The Egg Wizard from Sonic Rush Adventure directly scales over the Egg Salamander because of the unique power source it uses. For context, this game introduces this new energy called the Power of the Stars, which Eggman Nega implies is the reason alternate dimensions even exist in the verse. I should clarify that Power of the Stars is just the name of this power. It actually has nothing to do with the scaling implications, not saying that it's star level or whatever. If anything, it might be way beyond that. Now, you could interpret this statement to mean a few things. You can say that the Power of the Stars created the different dimensions we see throughout the franchise. You could also argue that the Power of the Stars are what sustain the dimensions, or maybe that they set the boundaries between each dimensions and keep them separated from each other. Regardless, Eggman and Eggman Nega obviously learn of this energy and then acquire an item called the Jewel Scepter, which is the key to harnessing this power, which they utilize with the Egg Wizard. After analyzing the energy readings from the Power of the Stars, Eggman outright says that the Chaos Emeralds and Soul Emeralds can't compare to it. meaning it should scale over that transcendent dimension statement I brought up earlier. Now, some of you might ask how Supersonic and Burning Blaze were able to defeat this if this statement were true, and the solution is simply the fact that Sonic and Blaze had an added amp that came from them working together. I touched on this in more detail in my How Strong is Sonic video, but throughout the series, it's very consistent for things like teamwork or friendship to give crazy amps in a lot of these very important battles that Sonic and friends take part in. Sonic even admits in this game that they probably can't beat the Egg Wizard unless they work together, and Team Sonic Racing very explicitly confirms that there's an inherent strength that comes from teamwork. So with this in mind, the Egg Wizard losing to Supersonic and Burning Blaze is not a contradiction. Now we've come to one of the more iconic Eggman mechs, which is the Time Eater from Sonic Generations. Now, the Time Eater did not start as mech. It was originally a primordial being that Eggman discovered post the events that took place in Sonic Colors. He looks into Time Eater's powers and discovers that it can erase time and space, and would use this to erase all previous defeats from history. In order to perfect the Time Eater, Eggman sought the help of someone equal to himself in intellect, which was his younger self. Throughout the game, Eggman has the Time Eater destroy numerous points from the timeline and eventually all space-time according to the Encyclopedia. Now, there's popular contention on some of these space-time destruction feats, with people debating if the feats are as a result of the Time Eater's raw attack potency or the result of his existing erasing abilities. I would lean on the latter because Eggman basically confirms that each destroyed world you play throughout the game was erased, and Eggman should obviously have the best knowledge on the Time Eater's abilities considering his discovery of it, whatever. This contention over his attack potency doesn't really matter ultimately, since the Time Eater would scale to the 5D argument I outlined earlier in the video. Outside of just erasure abilities, the Time Eater can create portals to send enemies throughout different parts of time. It also has the ability to drag parts of space into white space, which is described as a strange realm between dimensions that holds the universe together. The last notable ability Eggman showcases with this is used in the actual Time Eater boss battle, which involves the Time Eater building up time energy to slow down time. Outside of these time-based powers and abilities, there's not much Eggman can do with this, but with a name like Time Eater, this shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Moving on to another one of the more iconic mechs Eggman has made, we have the Death Egg Robot. The Death Egg Robot is a recurring enemy that is literally just a giant mech that looks like Eggman. In more recent games like Sonic Frontiers and Sonic Forces, the Death Egg Robot has a gray color scheme and is referred to as the Assault model by Tails, which is likely due to the fact that these were produced in mass during the war that takes place during Sonic Forces. Speaking of Sonic Forces, in that game, we also see a unique version of the Death Egg Robot that's created when Eggman merges with the Phantom Ruby. Now, actually gauging the strength of this robot can be a little bit complicated, since it doesn't have much lore outside of losing to Sonic all the time. Regarding the base version of this machine, the best scaling you can attribute to this robot is that it's seemingly implied that it powers the actual Death Egg itself in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It's a bit weird. So the implication for this is simply the fact that after Sonic defeats the robot, the entire Death Egg starts to collapse. Going off of this, you can make the argument that the Death Egg robots would be planetary, since the Death Egg is directly stated to be a planet-destroying battleship by Eggman himself in Sonic Battle. Furthermore, the Death Egg is also stated to be a doomsday machine in a guide, and doomsday can refer to the last day of the world's existence. If you've seen my previous Sonic video I made, which you should definitely check out by the way, you would know that this pales in comparison to what the Death Egg robot should scale to when fused with the Phantom Ruby. Before I dive too deep, I need to establish like a little bit of context. After Infinite is defeated by Sonic in their third battle, Eggman recalls the finalized Phantom Ruby prototype and absorbs it into the original Phantom Ruby. He then merges this amped up Phantom Ruby with a death robot to create this weird form that has a bunch of arms on its head and a random tail sticking out the bottom. Now, you could easily just scale this robot above Infinite, seeing as Eggman directly states that he surpassed Infinite and became the complete and ultimate form. Tails also implies that the Death Egg robot is serving as a substitute power generator for the Ruby, and that it now has an invulnerable energy supply. Due to this meaning, Eggman is accounting for the huge nerfs Infinite had after the first power generator was destroyed. As I mentioned in the previous Sonic video, Infinite is stated to be the most powerful enemy yet, which would most relevantly scale him over Solaris. Now, on the topic of Solaris, I want to re-establish how strong I think he is, with a new argument in mind, since it upscales Infinite, which thus upscales the Death Egg robot and forces. Previously, I had argued that Solaris being super dimensional compared to 4-dimensional space-time continuums in the verse would make him 5D at his peak, but we can push it a bit further with some of the scaling I presented in this video. Going off of the Egg Salamander argument I mentioned earlier, most of the high tiers in the series, including Supersonic, would have 5D power already, so if Solaris is super dimensional compared to that established level of power, he'd actually be 6D at his strongest. Of course, this would make Infinite 6D at his peak and also grant the Death Egg robot 6D power as well. On top of this absurd power increase, the Phantom Ruby also grants a wide array of abilities. When Tails looks over Eggman's data on the Ruby, he discovers how it's a virtual reality weapon that takes over people's visual and depth perception to feed false information into their brains and create new realities for them. He gives an analogy of how it's like a dream so real that if you get hurt in the dream, your sleeping self will bruise. Think of it like some people who say that when they pee in their dream, they actually end up peeing in real life. Like that's a thing that happens in our own world, but just cranked up to 10. Like if they actually fought someone in there, they would have fought them in the real world or something like that. So with this virtual reality power, we know the Phantom Ruby can create basically whatever the user wants. Infinite primarily showcases its ability to create clones both of himself and others. Shadow explains to Sonic that these clones are virtual reality projections which have mass and form but no heart or soul. Well, these are mere clones. They are just as powerful as their original counterpart. According to Rogue's research, the Phantom Ruby could allow Infinite to create an unlimited number of clones. The Phantom Ruby is also responsible for the creation of numerous Death Egg robots used throughout the war. The miniature sun Infinite made towards the end of Forces and Null Space, a closed off space where absolutely nothing exists, at least according to Eggman anyway. The Ruby has granted Infinite the ability to fly, manipulate gravity, manipulate his size, teleport, as well as a plethora of other abilities. Keep in mind that since the Phantom Ruby is stronger in being overclocked when Eggman uses it, he should have every ability Infinite had, but to an even greater extent. He should also have access to the abilities the Phantom Ruby showcases in Sonic Mania, like its space-time warping, its ability to send people back in time, and its power to create portals into different dimensions. One thing I want to note about the space-time warping is that the Phantom Ruby can seemingly anyway nullify Supersonic with this, as it forces Sonic back to base after Sonic defeats Eggman and the Phantom King. Of course, all the creations Eggman has made throughout the Sonic games, the schemes for the Phantom Ruby, had the most powerful preparation time put into it, and Eggman specifically reflected on every single defeat and humiliation Sonic had ever given him, when crafting it, so it's very understandable for it to have these weird and overpowered abilities, which for the most part are unheard of prior to this game. That's really all I had to say about Eggman. You know, just how strong is Eggman video. And it's mostly just scaling the mechs he has, because Eggman, I don't want to say he's a normal human, because he's obviously like a super genius who could tap into higher dimensions and things like that. But you know, he's got all these mechs that let him fight with Sonic. Now, like I said last video, still not gonna mention why I made this. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't, whatever. Obviously, like and subscribe. I can probably say now with confidence that more Sonic videos will probably be coming in the future. So if you do like Sonic, obviously you can stick around. But other than that, you know, have a nice day.